Welcome back to Proxy, everybody, and today we are going to be diving in, finally, to the World Championships of Warhammer. Now, I realize I'm pretty late to the party here, as the World Championships happened weeks ago. However, during the time of the World Championships, I was both extremely busy and not entirely interested in covering it in depth. As this is primarily an Eldar and Friends channel that covers primarily Eldar content, of course. So because the Eldar weren't really participating at the top tables of the tournament, I really didn't feel the need to cover the event that much. However, there was one list that indeed caught my eye. And of course, it was a list that included the Crimson Hunter, which I actually did a video on a while back and told people that yes, the Crimson Hunter is maybe a viable pick for competitive play in the future because of the nerfs to the Fire Prism and several of our other anti-tank platforms. Also due to the fact that it is a very effective unit in the mirror match, that is against other Eldar players. It's very good. It can basically one-shot Night Spinners, it can one-shot Fire Prisms, and then of course if you pair it with a Yinkarn, you can have all sorts of fun. So I was really excited in seeing how this list would perform on the battlefield with the inclusion of the Crimson Hunter in the highest level of competitive play. Alright, so let us go ahead and dive right into the video with a quick overview of what we're going to be looking at today. So we're going to be first looking at what the World Championships of Warhammer was and when it took place. We're going to be specifically looking at the Eldar list that brought a Crimson Hunter with analysis. And lastly, my thoughts on how Eldar players will adapt to a meta that has built around them. Alright, so for those of you guys who don't know or maybe a little bit unclear about what this was, essentially the World Championships of Warhammer was this massive Warhammer tournament sponsored by GW that took place in November. So it was from November 16th to 19th in Atlanta, Georgia in the United States. It consisted of 8 to 12 rounds based on player performance. So, most likely one player at least would have a bye. That's why you have 8 instead of 9. You'd have probably about 3 rounds a day for a 3-day tournament. And it was using Leviathan mission pack and terrain layouts. The World Championships were pretty intense and a lot of people were following it. And of course, the player base was made up of, some of the best players in the world that, are active in the competitive scene. So there was some really high skill level gameplay on display at the event. Unfortunately, however, the Eldar didn't win. The Eldar did not win the event. Actually, they did pretty poorly in the event compared to some of the other factions like Chaos Space Marines and, even just regular old vanilla Space Marines. Which actually made a lot of people really happy, especially people in my local gaming group. They were happy that Eldar didn't win. They were like, finally, Eldar don't win a tournament. Little did they know, the Eldar do not, in fact, win every tournament. So, yes, they didn't win this one. In fact, they didn't do that well. And we are going to examine why in the remainder of this video, because I feel like it does deserve some analysis. So we are going to be looking through the lens specifically of a list that I actually really liked and I hoped would do very well in the tournament. Now, it didn't end up doing well, but that is not a reflection on the player, and I just want to make that clear right off the bat. The list is actually very solid, and the player is also very skilled, and of course, we're talking about Benjamin Chia's Aeldari list. Now, the reason I wanted to look at this list again is because it's bringing the Crimson Hunter, and I did want to talk about that and why the Crimson Hunter might be a good choice for your competitive lists. And also, I do want to mention a special thanks to my Discord for helping me locate the list. So thank you so much, guys, for helping me out so that I can make this video. All right, so here's the list basically in its full glory. So right there for you on one slide. You're starting off with an Autarch Wayleaper, has the basic stuff, except this time the Autarch Wayleaper has the Mandablasters instead of the Howling Banshee Mask. We have the Avatar of Cain, a Farseer with Phoenix Gem, Fuegan, and the Yinkarn. Following that up, we have, of course, the famous Crimson Hunter, a Falcon, a Night Spinner, well, actually dual Night Spinners there. We have a unit of Rangers, Swooping Hawks, 2 units of those, and a Lonely Warwalker. So let's go ahead and analyze the characters first and foremost, because I believe this is kind of a very important aspect to this list. So when you look at the characters, a lot of people might look at this and say, well, this is really character heavy, right? But actually, I think this is quite a good lineup of characters for what this player was trying to pull off. So Benjamin is starting off, of course, with the classic Autarch Wayleaper, except he has chosen to give it Manda Blasters instead of the Howling Banshee Mask. Now, I personally prefer the Howling Banshee Mask because it means that if somebody wants to charge me out of Deep Strike or somebody wants to charge me late on in the game, the Autarch has the ability to strike first and thus protect himself from a little bit of that damage coming in. And for me, the Banshee Mask has actually worked better despite the chance of devastating wounds proccing with the Manda Blasters. But in a list like this where you want your characters to have as much punch as possible, the Manda Blasters are a pretty good option. You also have the Avatar of Khaine, which is an absolute powerhouse of a unit. I don't need to go into why. It's extremely tough, extremely damaging, and benefits from a lot of the synergies that, you can provide it via the, Autarch Wayleaper and the Farseer. Because the Avatar of Khaine, of course, benefits greatly from lightning fast reflexes and fire and fade. So for both of those, you do need some extra command points, which the Autarch can provide. And of course, the Farseer passing out Fortune on it every turn is pretty good as well. You also have Fuegan in the list, which is good because he is also a Phoenix gem, essentially. He revives on a 2+ as well, so he can get to mid-ground objectives early on and make it hard for enemies to deal with him unless they have a way to shoot him and assault him in the same turn, which unfortunately, is not so much of a problem for Chaos Space Marines, which we'll talk a little bit about later. And lastly, he does include the Incarn as well. So the Incarn synergizes great with things like the Crimson Hunter and the Night Spinners to be able to pop up on the battlefield, basically wherever it wants to when you kill an enemy unit. As for the other data sheets, the infantry include 2 units of 5 Swooping Hawks. Of course, the Exarchs have the free Hawk's Talons, and you have 5 Rangers as well. So the Rangers are a great setup unit as well. They prevent enemies from essentially infiltrating and scouting near you in the beginning of the game. And the Swooping Hawks are there to score you secondary objectives. The Rangers can also do this very early on because, they have infiltrate, so they can come up there and basically score on deployed teleport homers from turn 1. So this army has a lot of secondary objective options in the beginning of the game. Now, as for the vehicles in the list, we have the double Night Spinner with Shuriken Cannon, so they're there to kind of open up some avenues for the Incarn to come in or just slow enemies down, which is very important in a list like this because it doesn't have a big footprint, so you need to make sure that you can control your enemies' units as much as possible. You also have a Falcon with a Bright Lance and Shuriken Cannon, weirdly enough with no Fire Dragons, so there's no Fire Dragons in this list, there's just Fuegan, so it looks like the Falcon is either going to be empty or going to just be simply carrying Rangers until they can, kind of be safe. So this is probably a tech against any kind of, Thousand Suns list that can just blow the Rangers off the board early, or, any list with a good amount of indirect that can easily just wipe out the Rangers. Right? And the Rangers are important in this list for one thing and one thing alone, that is killing support characters. So I'm sure that Benjamin kind of thought in the back of his mind that Chaos Space Marines might bring something like the Dark Commune, and having a unit of 5 Rangers that can deploy out of a Falcon would be a good tech against them. So I actually did find this very interesting that he included this and basically had nothing else in the Falcon, and it was meant for the Rangers. This also gives you, though, the kind of versatility of, if you're not going against Chaos Space Marines and you don't need that extra precision damage, then you could always deploy the Rangers outside of the Falcon. And the Falcon is still a very good anti-tank platform. And, in a pinch, you can just throw Fuegan in there and just have him, basically have an additional 3 inches of movement when he gets out of it, to get to those center objectives and things like that. He has a Warwalker with Bright Lances, obviously for trading against enemy vehicles. And lastly, but not least, he has the Crimson Hunter, which I think kind of brings this whole list together. Because you have the Incarn, and, the Incarn wants to get stuck into the enemy early on in the game, but doesn't always have a great avenue to do it against heavier targets, right? Your Night Spinners can take out a heavy target, but it's kind of dicey, especially if you only have 2 Night Spinners. So Benjamin brought in the Crimson Hunter to do the job. So yes, Crimson Hunters are armed with 2 Bright Lances and a Pulse Laser and can very easily take out support tanks that are in the enemy deployment zone. So what were my initial thoughts on the list? So right off the bat, I'm looking at the list and I'm seeing that it is extremely durable with the double Avatar, And the Night Spinners are really good on the primary objective game on paper, right? So you get the Avatar of Canaan on objective. He can hold down an objective from enemy shooting, and then Night Spinners can slow enemy units down so they can't get to objectives. So he has the primary objective game, at least on paper, covered. The Hawks can score on secondaries. He has 2 units of those, and the Rangers can also set up and screen, and it's a great anti-character tech, which was interesting. You know, when I saw the Falcon without fire dragons, I wondered for a second until I saw the Rangers, and then I was like, he's obviously using this for a, kind of cheeky dark commune tech that can, take out the character and eliminate the feel no pain and the 5+ invulnerable from the unit. So can kind of protect him against that insane objective control that the accursed cultists have. And also the insane durability that they have with the character attached, with that dark commune attached, right? So I thought that was actually a very good play. He has plenty of anti-large on the list, and he has ignoring line of sight elements via the Crimson Hunter and the Night Spinners, which are both great Yin-Karn delivery systems. So looking at this list just overall on paper, it looks fantastic. It has a lot of synergy in it between the Yin-Karn, the Crimson Hunter, and the Night Spinners. It has a lot of primary objective power. It has good secondary control, and it seems to have all of its bases covered with damage. So if it looks great on paper and it's being piloted by a really good Eldar player, what did it do? How did it perform in the World Championships? Well, as it turns out, not great. Not great. So was this Benjamin's fault? Absolutely not. I think this is actually, endemic of another type of problem that the Eldar are running against in competitive play at the moment. But this list was, very strong on paper. So why did it perform so poorly? So he ended up going 2 for 1 for 5. So he had 2 wins, 1 draw, and 5 losses. And in not a single game did he score above 90 points, which is another indicator that the list didn't do well when it really should have on paper. And in fact, in 2 of the games he played, he actually scored below 60 points as well. So not only did he lose those games, but he scored extremely low. So overall, it looks like he had a rough time of it. But why? Why did he have such a rough time of it? He's a great player. His list looks solid on paper. What exactly went wrong? So here are the possible explanations for the poor performance, and I think it really has to get us thinking about how the meta is changing and adapting to the Eldar, right? Because as you guys know, the Eldar are the top performing faction in competitive play right now, and a lot of people are building against them. They're at least building with Eldar in mind. And having said that, I know that some of you trolls out there are going to say, well, he brought a Crimson Hunter. Of course he didn't do well in the tournament. The Crimson Hunter is a meme. Guys, you are wrong. And you know it. Deep down, you know you're wrong, okay? The Crimson Hunter is great, especially in this list. I think it really fit in great, and I don't think the Crimson Hunter was the actual problem. I think the real problem was this list had no real anti-horde. Yes, he had the tech against the Dark Commune, which is great, but what was there to follow it up? There was really no anti-horde options available. The biggest anti-horde unit that's also competitive that we have at the moment, the Shadow Spectres, were not in this list. And Swooping Hawks, while good against infantry, are really needed to focus on the secondary objective game. So they're not always going to be in play to be able to do that. They're not always going to be available to shoot. And they're really the only thing that can easily sweep units aside. And even then, Swooping Hawks against the Dark Commune are not effective when the Commune's leader is still alive. So it actually still takes a lot of resources to be able to kill a Dark Commune unit, even if you are able to wipe out its leader, right? It takes a unit of Rangers, the Falcon, and 2 units of Swooping Hawks to be able to ensure that that unit dies. And depending on how the dice go, you may not even be able to do that. Most likely you will, but, maybe not, right? And then one of the Dark Commune units, I believe from one of the winning Chaos Space Marine lists, was actually a Nurgle marked unit, which means it can use Dark Obscuration and basically just become immune to shooting, right? Basically have lone operative. So I like the tech, but the tech wasn't really going to do much against one unit of Chaos Cultists, let alone multiple units, which is what the winning list brought. This list also has an extremely small footprint, and it doesn't have a lot of coverage. So this isn't entirely apparent on paper when you're just reading the list, but when you set it up, this list actually has very few models. It's very character heavy and it's very vehicle heavy. There's not a lot of actual infantry units in the list. There's only 15 infantry models that are not characters. And that means a good player going against this list will notice that and will eliminate the Swooping Hawks and Rangers right off the bat and make sure that this Eldar list can't score effectively on secondaries, and as such will have to, or be forced to, use the bigger units in the list to score on those secondaries instead. So all of a sudden, the Avatar of Cain, your vehicles, your Falcon and stuff like that are being forced to go in separate directions on the board, scoring secondaries instead of focusing on killing enemy units. And that is going to be a recipe for disaster, especially when you spend a bunch of points on things that are supposed to be killing the enemy and murdering the enemy, and instead they're just sitting around doing secondaries. And of course, this isn't always a bad thing, right? I mean, I know for a fact that me, for example, when I play a game and I'm in the later turns of the game, I definitely use the Avatar of Cain or Yin Karn and things like that to score on secondary objectives. But if I'm ever stuck in a scenario where my high value killing units are being forced to score on secondaries, and I'm not killing my opponent's units who are therefore scoring on secondary objectives, blocking me out of certain areas of the board, stuff like that, then I'm going to be in big trouble. And I really do think that this is exactly what happened to Benjamin. Now, I didn't watch all of the games that Benjamin played. But what I can tell you is that after, looking at the list and kind of setting it up on a board and kind of running through a few turns with it, I found out that a wary opponent can easily recognize that the list doesn't have a lot of secondary power once the Swooping Hawks and Rangers are out of the picture. And the other thing a lot of people may not realize is that, yes, there is a tech against the Dark Commune in this list. But if an opponent is running multiple Dark Communes and multiple units of accursed Chaos Cultists, there's not a lot an Eldar list like this can do against it. And despite the fact that the Avatar of Cain and Yin Karn and those kind of units are really solid on primary objectives, like, those accursed cultists are never going to kill the Avatar of Cain when he is on an objective. But what they will do is they will out-OC the Avatar of Cain. Because despite the fact that the Avatar of Cain has a lot of killing power, he does not have the ability to one-round a unit of accursed cultists. He just doesn't have the amount of attacks needed to do it. And yeah, he can definitely take out the Dark Commune's leader, no doubt, right? Because he is a character. He has access to Epic Challenge. But even though he has access to that, that still is not going to allow him to control that objective. And therefore, the Chaos Space Marine players' accursed cultists are going to do their job. They're going to score on that primary objective and waste the Avatar of Cain's time. And if the Chaos Space Marine player is allowed to do this for multiple turns in a row, the Eldar player is not going to be able to score on primary objectives. And not only that, but the Chaos Space Marines army, the Legionaries, the Chosen, all those things are going to be used to block out the Swooping Hawks and Rangers from scoring on secondaries. And then at that point, not only have you lost the primary objective game, but you have also lost the secondary objective game. And while you may not lose your Avatar of Cain, your Avatar of Cain and Yin Karn may be standing at the end of the game, you're not going to have much to show for it, and the game's going to be over before you know it. Okay, so having talked a little bit about why I think the list didn't have as much success as it should have, just based on how strong it looked on paper, let's discuss how Eldar players will adapt to a meta that has definitely built around them. So the lists at the tournament definitely built them with the Eldar in mind, as the top lists had very clear answers to the Eldar meta builds, especially things like the Avatar of Cain and the Yin Karn. As the meta evolves, we do have to adapt to the real possibility of faster, more horde-style armies emerging to counter our very efficient anti-large. Imperial Guard, Chaos Space Marines, Orcs, and of course regular Space Marines are all capable of fielding quite a large number of OC2 models. And although of course some armies do it better than others, I actually think an IG infantry list would be almost impossible to deal with from, a number of kind of meta quote-unquote Eldar builds. Chaos Space Marines and Orcs can do a very similar thing with a large number of fast-moving bodies, right? Imperial Guard, by the way, aren't that slow. With orders, they can use move, move, move and things like that, and they can actually get onto objectives pretty quickly and take it by surprise. Same thing with Orcs, right? If you have a lot of Orcs in Orc trucks, they are very fast as well, and they are pretty tough. So you're not going to be able to deal with them, with just swooping hawks. You're going to need something a little bit harder hitting against infantry. So how do we adapt? I think obviously Shroud Runners are a great tool for popping characters like the Dark Commune, as well as being fast and good anti-horde. They are ranged, they are quick, they have a scout move, so theoretically they can get up into a Dark Commune's face and pop the leader before he knows what hit him. And yes, you might lose the Shroud Runners, but not before they mark the target, give you lethal hits for the rest of your army, and you're able to pick up that unit fairly easily afterward. Dire Avengers also have great anti-horde with a powerful overwatch. If an opponent wants to run an accursed squad or, an Imperial Guard squad up to an objective to capture it and advance, obviously they don't have assault weapons in Imperial Guard for the most part. Their last guns are just rapid fire. So if they do choose to advance and things like that, they're not going to be able to shoot you. So you can safely overwatch at 18 inches and blow away a lot of them before they even get to you. Wave Serpents can offer some great anti-infantry support and can be extremely disruptive when you consider they can charge in and, deal mortal wounds, cause a battle shock test perhaps once per game, and also just do tank stuff, block large areas of the board, and just in general be disruptive to enemy plans. They also have a 5+ invulnerable save, so have a little bit of extra durability over their Falcon cousin. So yes, the Falcon is a very good model, and I think we'll see more of those as the meta advances, especially Fire Dragons and things like that in Falcons. I do think they're going to be pretty much the next evolution in the Eldar meta. And I will also have a video on Falcons and Fire Dragons in the coming weeks, so stay tuned for that, perhaps even by the end of this week. But yes, in general, I think these 3 units are going to be seen more in competitive play. You're going to see more Dire Avengers and Shroud Runners, in addition to other anti-infantry elements. Enemy armies in competitive play are going to be including more and more infantry to be able to control the objective game a little bit better. And I think as time has gone on, people are adapting to the Eldar and realizing that they do in fact need to take some tough infantry in their list to be able to stand a chance. They can't just take a bunch of vehicles and a bunch of monsters and kind of monster mash or vehicle mash their way through an Eldar army. We're just very efficient at anti-large. So you kind of have to play a different game against them. You kind of have to build some infantry in your list to be able to contest that objective game. Because if you don't contest the objective game against the Eldar, if you don't force them to fight a battle that they do not want to fight, they're always going to win, right? So if you play to the Eldar's strengths, if you don't hit their weaknesses, they're always going to be able to come out on top. And I do think that obviously a lot of competitive players are starting to realize this and successfully adapting against the most powerful Eldar builds. Okay, so in conclusion, Benjamin Shia's Aeldari list was an extremely powerful list with a lot of synergy, no doubt. But it didn't quite have the tools to deal with an evolving meta that is building to deal with Eldar, especially versus the super elite lists we typically see from Eldar players. Competitive players are building more infantry. They're building into tough infantry. If you look at orcs, they're building into things like knobs with war bosses. If you look at Chaos Space Marines, they're really leaning into the accursed cultists with the Dark Commune. And the armies that are doing the best against Eldar as well are armies that are very infantry-based, right? So Genestealer Cults is an army that got really nerfed last balanced data slate, but they were doing really good before that. And Imperial Guard are much of the same way. If you run against an Imperial Guard infantry army with very little vehicles, you're going to be in for a tough time. Because not only do Guard have more OC than you do, but they're also going to be able to come back once you kill their unit. So you kill their, blob of 20 Imperial Guardsmen, and they could just bring them right back via the reinforcement stratagem, which is very powerful and means you're basically going to be drowning in a sea of OC2 bodies the entire game. Luckily for now, most Imperial Guard players are bringing a healthy amount of tanks with them in competitive play, which plays right into our strengths, right? Because we have a lot of nice, very efficient Bright Lances that can easily take down Leman Russ battle tanks. With average rolling, of course. So there is that. Now, lastly, despite the Eldar's poor performance in the tournament, I am convinced that we haven't seen the last of the Crimson Hunter in competitive play. So yes, I do think obviously there are going to be some nerfs in January, and we're very close, right? We're about 3 weeks out until we see the nerfs hit us again. But the thing is the Crimson Hunter is probably not going to be touched, and unless they really ruin the special rule of the Yinkarn, I still see the Yinkarn being fairly effective as well. And even so, right, even if you don't have the Yinkarn, the Crimson Hunter is still a very effective tool for dealing with things out of line of sight that normally your army would not be able to deal with, especially since the Night Spinner is also slated to get nerfed in January as well. So I really don't think we've seen the last of the Crimson Hunter, and I think we're even going to start seeing units like Storm Guardians. And yeah, that's right. There is a list apparently that had a unit of Storm Guardians in it that competed in competitive play and did quite well. And that's something I am super pumped about. I am super excited that Storm Guardians have started to appear in competitive play. I figured they were a pretty good unit, and I, had a video on them and stuff like that, and I've talked at great length about Storm Guardians this edition, especially since the Eldar nerfs that kind of hit us in September. So I am really glad to see that because, they are a good unit and they do fill a niche that the Eldar desperately need, which is an objective control unit that also has sticky objectives, right? Because that is very powerful. And yeah, when you compare them to Cabalites, they're not as good as Cabalites, but guess what? Craft Worlds cannot take Cabalites. So the next best thing, of course, is Storm Guardians, and they're actually very effective, and I've had a lot of success with them myself. Even against very experienced journeyman tournament players. All right, everybody, that is going to be it for today's video. Thanks for watching. Thank you to all my patrons and supporters who have supported the channel over the last year. Your help has greatly improved the channel and helped it grow significantly. If you do want to become a Patreon member and help support the channel, I have free trials activated. And a free trial will grant you permanent access to our Discord community, which is a community of Eldar players and enthusiasts who love talking about strategy, tactics, and of course, hobbying. I will leave the link for that in the description. And yes, for those of you guys wondering, I am very active on the community Discord as well. So if you want to strike up a conversation with me or need some advice on a list or something like that, I am more than happy to help you with that. And one last thing before I forget, I am an Amazon affiliate and do have a channel store page. So if you want to grab some discounted Eldar miniatures on Amazon or some Eldar inspired apparel on my channel store page, I will leave the links for those in the description as well. All right, everybody, that's going to be it for today. Peace out, and I'll see you guys next time. Have some great games this weekend, you guys. See you later.